Don't touch that safe. Those were the first words out of my mouth when I stepped through my front door and found the president of Blackridge Estates standing in my living room while two HOA security contractors rolled my steel safe across the hardwood on a furniture dolly. The front door frame had been forced open, leaving splintered pine scattered across the entryway. Fine white drywall dust hung in the air, mixing with the sharp smell of fresh-cut wood and Cynthia Harrow's expensive perfume. The dolly wheels squeaked under nearly 300 pounds of steel. Squeak. Roll. Squeak. Roll. I set my keys carefully on the entry table. Cynthia turned toward me without the slightest hint that she thought anything was wrong. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged, her cream-colored jacket didn't have a speck of dust on it, and a Blackridge Estates clipboard rested against her hip like she was conducting a routine landscaping inspection instead of standing inside my house without permission. Gregory Vance, the HOA treasurer, hovered near my office doorway holding a folder against his chest. One of the contractors stopped pushing the safe. Cynthia didn't. Keep moving, she said. I looked past her toward the small security camera mounted above the hallway. A tiny green light was glowing. Recording. Good. Cynthia, I said, keeping my voice level. Put the safe back. She gave me that thin smile I'd seen at every HOA meeting for 6 months. I'm afraid that's not possible, Daniel. This property has been seized as part of an emergency HOA compliance investigation. She lifted a sheet of paper from her clipboard and held it toward me. Blackridge Estates letterhead. Bold type. Emergency Property Inspection Authorization. I didn't reach for it yet. You entered my home under that. We had reasonable cause. Reasonable cause for what? Gregory shifted his weight. Cynthia answered for him. Unauthorized association records are being concealed on this property. Anything relevant to our investigation may be temporarily secured. I looked at the safe again. Matte black steel, 30 inches high, electronic keypad. The same safe she'd been asking strange questions about for weeks. Now, I understood why. She thought whatever was inside could hurt her. More importantly, she thought taking it would make her problem disappear. Who authorized you to seize private property? I asked. Her smile widened. The board. That answer told me more than she realized. One contractor cleared his throat. Ma'am, maybe we should stop until... Continue, Cynthia snapped. The wheels started moving again. Squeak. Roll. Squeak. Roll. I could have ended the performance right there. I could have told Cynthia what my neighbors didn't know about me, what I deliberately kept private since moving into Blackridge Estates. I wasn't some anonymous state office worker pushing forms behind a government desk. I ran the state anti-corruption unit. My job was following money, preserving evidence, and watching arrogant people make irreversible mistakes because they believed nobody with real authority was paying attention. Cynthia had just entered my house, created her own paperwork, and ordered my safe removed while my cameras recorded everything. So I didn't argue. I didn't threaten her. I finally took the authorization from her hand, folded it once, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I looked directly at Cynthia and said, Are you absolutely sure you want to take that safe? She laughed. Daniel, we already did. I glanced once more at the green recording light above the hallway. Then I smiled. All right. 6 months earlier, Blackridge Estates had looked like exactly the kind of place where nothing interesting was supposed to happen. 40 minutes outside the state capitol, it was all trimmed lawns, matching stone mailboxes, young maple trees, and 2-story homes painted in shades somebody had probably named warm linen and coastal gray. I bought a 3-bedroom house at the end of Hawthorne Court because the backyard faced 12 acres of protected woods, and the street went almost silent after 9 at night. After years of working cases where my phone could ring before sunrise and keep ringing until midnight, silence had become a luxury. The first morning there, I stood in the kitchen with black coffee warming my hands and listened to rain tap against the windows. No interviews, no subpoenas, no conference room full of attorneys. Just rain. That was exactly what I wanted. Most of my neighbors knew I worked for the state, but that was all I told them. Whenever somebody asked what I did, I said I worked in compliance administration. Technically true. Boring enough to kill the conversation in 10 seconds. What I left out was the title printed beneath my name on the identification card locked inside my desk. Director, State Anti-Corruption Unit. I had spent 18 years following public money through shell vendors, padded contracts, false invoices, and officials who thought complicated paperwork could make simple dishonesty invisible. At home, though, I wanted to be Daniel Mercer, the guy who mowed his own lawn and forgot which night the recycling went out. The safe arrived during my second week. Matte black steel, almost 300 pounds, 30 inches high, delivered on a hydraulic cart by two men who complained about my front steps the entire way. I anchored it inside the office closet and tested the electronic lock 3 times. Beep, beep, click. That final click had a satisfying weight to it. Inside went my passport, property deed, insurance documents, family papers, backup drives containing personal records, and a few sealed files I was legally permitted to keep there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing Cynthia Harrow had any right to see. I met her 48 hours later. I was replacing a loose sprinkler head when a white luxury sport utility vehicle rolled to the curb so quietly I barely noticed it. The window lowered. Cynthia looked over the top of oversized sunglasses. "Daniel Mercer?" she asked. "That depends. Am I already in trouble?" I smiled. She did not. She introduced herself as president of the Blackridge Estates Homeowners Association, then glanced from my muddy work gloves to the open garage as if she were conducting an appraisal. Her perfume reached me before she stepped onto the driveway. Floral, expensive, heavy enough to compete with the smell of wet grass. "We take standards seriously here," she said. "That is why property values remain strong." I nodded. "Sounds reasonable." Her eyes moved toward the house. Through the office window, the black edge of the safe was barely visible behind the open closet door. She stared at it for half a second too long. Then she looked back at me and smiled. "And what did you say you do for the state?" "Compliance administration." That seemed to relax her. "Paperwork." "A lot of paperwork." She laughed softly, climbed back into her vehicle, and drove away. The next morning, an envelope was tucked beneath my front door. My first violation notice. The sprinkler repair had apparently left visible soil on my lawn for more than 24 hours. I read the sentence twice, looked through the window at 3 square feet of dirt, and almost laughed. Instead, I filed the notice in my desk. At the time, I thought Cynthia was simply obsessed with rules. I had no idea she had just started teaching me exactly how Blackridge Estates worked. 3 weeks after that first violation notice, a thick white envelope appeared in my mailbox with the words "Special Assessment" printed across the front in red. I opened it at the kitchen counter while the coffee maker hissed behind me. Blackridge Estates was charging every homeowner $4,800 for something Cynthia called an emergency security modernization program. New entrance cameras, upgraded gate controls, license plate readers, additional private patrols. Payment was due within 30 days. I read the packet twice, then a third time. 18 years in anti-corruption work had trained my eyes to notice what paperwork avoided saying. There was no competitive bid summary, no vendor comparison, no detailed equipment list, no board minutes explaining why the project qualified as an emergency. Just a polished 2-page description and a payment deadline. I was not accusing anyone of anything. I had seen legitimate projects documented badly before. So I sent Cynthia a short email asking for the vendor bids, approved budget, and meeting minutes. Her response arrived 11 minutes later. "Those records are internal association materials and are not distributed to individual homeowners." I stared at the screen. That was interesting. I replied with one sentence. "Please identify." The section of the governing documents that restricts homeowner access to financial records. This time, she did not answer for 6 hours. At 7:17 that evening, my doorbell rang. Cynthia stood outside with Gregory Vance, the association treasurer. Gregory was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and dressed like he had walked out of a country club board meeting. He carried a leather portfolio that looked expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. When I opened the door, cool October air pushed the smell of fallen leaves into the foyer. Cynthia smiled. "Daniel, we thought it would be easier to clear up your confusion in person." "I am not confused," I said. "I am asking for the bids." Gregory opened his portfolio and removed a glossy brochure showing cameras mounted around a gated community. The board selected the most qualified provider. "Which provider?" He hesitated. Barely a second, but I noticed. Sentinel Civic Solutions. How many companies submitted bids? Cynthia's smile tightened. The board handled the procurement process appropriately. That was not an answer either. I asked for the contract. Gregory closed the portfolio. The soft snap of the magnetic clasp sounded strangely loud. Cynthia looked past me into the hallway. My office door was open. So was the closet. The edge of the black safe was visible from where she stood. Her eyes stopped there. "You keep association documents at home?" she asked. "I keep my documents at home." "What kind?" "The kind that belong to me." Gregory glanced at Cynthia. Something passed between them without a word. Then she returned her attention to me. "You should be careful about retaining confidential association materials. You have not given me any association materials." Silence. For the first time since I had met her, Cynthia seemed to realize she had said more than she intended. She recovered quickly, wished me a pleasant evening, and walked back toward her vehicle. Gregory followed. The next morning, I found 3 violation notices taped to my front door. One for leaving my garage open for 43 minutes. One for an allegedly non-compliant porch light. One for a trash container visible from the street. The total fine was $375. I stood there listening to sprinklers ticking across the neighboring lawns, the papers rough between my fingers. Then Laura Bennett stepped out of the house across the street. She looked at the notices, then at me. "You asked about the money, did you not?" she said quietly. I nodded. Laura glanced toward Cynthia's house before lowering her voice. "So did I." That was when the $4,800 assessment stopped looking like bad paperwork and started looking like a pattern. Laura crossed the street carrying a faded blue folder against her chest. Up close, I could see the corners were worn soft from being opened too many times. She waited until we were inside my kitchen before setting it on the counter. "I started asking questions last year," she said. The refrigerator hummed behind us while I opened the folder. Violation notices. Assessment letters. Copies of checks. Meeting summaries. Nothing dramatic by itself, but patterns rarely announce themselves with flashing lights. They hide in dates, amounts, signatures, and repeated names. Laura pointed to a $1,200 landscaping assessment from the previous spring. They said storm damage made it necessary. I looked through the paperwork. "Did you ever see the bids?" She gave me a tired smile. "Cynthia told me homeowners were not qualified to evaluate contractors." 2 weeks after Laura requested the records, she received citations for her fence stain, driveway edging, and a decorative planter near her porch. I laid her notices beside mine. Same formatting. Same language. Same sequence. Ask about money. Get stonewalled. Receive violations. "Do you still have the original emails?" I asked. "Every one." "Keep them." I closed the folder. "Do not give me your originals. Make copies and keep everything exactly where it is." That afternoon, I started reading Blackridge financial reports the way I would read any unfamiliar set of records, slowly, without assuming what I was going to find. Publicly available corporate registrations led me to Sentinel Civic Solutions. The address caught my attention first. It was not an office, tower, or a security facility. It was a commercial mailbox 12 miles away. The company had been formed 14 months earlier. Then I found another name appearing on older Blackridge invoices. Vance Property Consulting. Gregory Vance. I leaned back from my desk as the late afternoon sun stretched across the floor. Coincidence was possible. So was a legitimate business relationship. My job had taught me never to turn suspicion into a conclusion just because the pieces looked convenient. I needed records, not instinct. That created another problem. I was personally involved now. My house. My fines. My homeowners association. If I used my position to investigate Cynthia myself, she could later claim I had weaponized state authority over a neighborhood dispute. I was not going to hand her that argument. Monday morning, I drove to the state office and asked Special Investigator Rachel Donovan to meet me in the small conference room at the end of our floor. Rachel had spent 11 years tracing procurement fraud and could find an irregular invoice faster than most people could find their car keys. I placed copies of the publicly available records on the table. "I need distance from this," I told her. "My homeowners association is involved." Rachel read silently for several minutes. Paper slid against paper. The ventilation system whispered overhead. Finally, she tapped the Sentinel registration with one finger. "You are asking me to evaluate this independently." "Exactly. I do not direct the outcome. I do not contact vendors. I do not touch investigative decisions." She nodded. "Understood." That evening, I carried only my personal copies home. Cynthia was outside talking with Gregory near her white sport utility vehicle when I pulled into my driveway. I could feel their eyes following me as I walked inside with a large manila envelope. In my office, I placed Laura's copied assessment notices and my own HOA correspondence into the safe. Beep, beep, click. When I turned around, Cynthia was still across the street. She was looking directly through my office window. Not at me, at the safe. The next morning, a certified envelope arrived demanding an inspection of my home for suspected possession of confidential association property. I read it once and set it on the counter. Cynthia had finally stopped pretending this was about porch lights. The inspection demand gave me 72 hours to provide access to what Cynthia called association-related materials stored inside the residence. I read that phrase twice at my kitchen counter while rain ticked softly against the glass. Then I opened the Blackridge governing documents and searched every section dealing with inspections, records, and enforcement. Nothing gave Cynthia authority to enter my home because she suspected I possessed copies of HOA paperwork. I sent a written response before breakfast. I would cooperate with any lawful request. I would not consent to a search of my home or safe. At 9:14 that morning, Cynthia replied, "Refusal will be treated as evidence of intentional concealment." I almost admired the sentence. It managed to sound official without actually saying anything. I printed the email and placed it beside her inspection demand. Paper first. Always paper. 2 days later, another notice arrived. Then another. One accused me of conducting unauthorized administrative activity from a residential property. Another claimed excessive document storage could constitute prohibited commercial use. I stared at that one for several seconds. Apparently, paper had become a zoning violation. Meanwhile, Rachel kept her distance exactly as I had requested. She did not tell me what investigative steps she was taking, and I did not ask. At work, our conversation stayed focused on unrelated state cases. At home, I remained just another Blackridge homeowner asking where $4,800 had gone. That distinction mattered. Cynthia did not understand it. She interpreted restraint as fear. Gregory became bolder too. At the next HOA meeting, he announced that certain residents were spreading misinformation and improperly retaining confidential financial materials. He never said my name, but Cynthia looked directly at me from the front table. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us. Folding chairs scraped across the community room floor. I raised my hand. Are homeowners prohibited from keeping copies of notices sent to them? Gregory adjusted his tie. That is not what I said. Then which documents are missing? Silence. Cynthia leaned toward her microphone. Daniel, this board is not going to debate internal security matters in public. I asked which documents are missing. Her fingers tightened around a pen. You know exactly what this concerns. I did not, but now I knew she believed I did. That was more useful. 3 nights later, I was filing my personal correspondence when headlights swept across the office wall. Cynthia's white sport utility vehicle had stopped near my driveway. She remained inside for almost a minute before driving away. I looked at the safe. Beep. Beep. Click. The sound seemed louder than usual. The next morning, I moved nothing important. I destroyed nothing. I hid nothing. I simply verified that my home security cameras were working and that their recordings were backed up automatically. Front porch, driveway, hallway, office entrance. Ordinary home security, installed long before Cynthia became interested in my paperwork. By Friday, her certified letters had changed tone. She was no longer requesting access. She was asserting that the board possessed emergency authority to secure association property if there was a risk of destruction or concealment. No court order. No law enforcement authorization. Just Cynthia's interpretation of Cynthia's authority. I placed that letter in the safe with the others. The steel door closed beneath my palm. Beep. Beep. Click. Through the window, I saw her vehicle parked half a block away. For the first time, I understood the mistake she was preparing to make. Cynthia believed the evidence was inside that steel box. She believed taking the box would take away the problem. And because I kept refusing to panic, she had convinced herself that I was protecting something valuable. I stood there in the quiet office, listening to the furnace hum through the vents, and realized she was no longer trying to intimidate me into silence. She was trying to invent permission to come inside. The mistake came on a Thursday evening, 23 days after I first asked to see the vendor bids. I left the state office at 6:12 with a cold cup of coffee in the console and rain beginning to mist across the windshield. By the time I turned onto Hawthorne Court, the streetlights had come on, throwing pale circles across the wet pavement. Then I saw Cynthia's white sport utility vehicle parked in front of my house. Behind it sat a gray security van with the Blackridge Estates logo on the door. My garage was closed. My porch light was on. My front door was not where I had left it. The frame had been forced open near the latch, leaving pale splinters scattered across the entry tile. I parked at the curb and stepped out. The cold air smelled like wet leaves and fresh-cut pine. Then I heard it from inside. Squeak. Roll. Squeak. Roll. I walked through the damaged doorway and found the scene I would replay in my head for months. Cynthia stood in my living room holding her clipboard. Gregory was near the office. 2 private security contractors had my safe strapped upright on a furniture dolly. A third man was photographing the hallway with his phone. "Don't touch that safe," I said. Everyone stopped except Cynthia. "Daniel," she said, almost sounding relieved. "Good. You are home." She raised a document bearing the Blackridge letterhead. The board authorized an emergency preservation action. I looked at the paper, then at Gregory. Preservation of what? Gregory cleared his throat. Association records believed to be unlawfully retained. Believed by whom? Cynthia stepped closer. "We gave you multiple opportunities to cooperate." I could hear the small motor in my refrigerator running from the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, the heating system clicked on. Ordinary sounds. That was what made the scene feel so strange. "Did you call law enforcement?" I asked. "This is an internal association matter. Do you have a court order?" Her expression hardened. "We do not need one to enforce our governing authority." One of the contractors looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, you told us access had been legally approved." "It has." I glanced toward the hallway camera. Green light. Still recording. The driveway camera would have captured the vehicles arriving. The porch camera would have recorded everyone entering. My backup service would already be preserving copies away from the house. Cynthia followed my eyes and finally noticed the camera. For half a second, her confidence slipped. Then Gregory spoke. "We should finish." Cynthia nodded. The dolly moved again. Squeak. Roll. I did not block anyone. I did not touch the safe. I did not raise my voice. I took out my phone and photographed the damaged frame, the authorization in Cynthia's hand, the security uniforms, and the safe moving toward the door. Then I asked the question I needed answered clearly. "Cynthia, who authorized entry into my home?" She lifted her chin. "The Blackridge Estates board." "And who authorized removal of the safe?" "The board did." "Is that your signature on the authorization?" She looked almost offended. "Of course it is." I held out my hand. "May I see it?" She gave me the document with a little flick of her wrist. I read it carefully. Emergency authority. Preservation of association property. Immediate seizure permitted. Signed Cynthia Harrow, President. Gregory Vance, Treasurer. 2 signatures. 2 names. 1 document. I folded it once and slipped it into my coat pocket. "Thank you." Cynthia frowned. "For what?" "For answering clearly." The contractors rolled the safe down the short walkway and toward the gray van. Cynthia followed them, but I stayed inside for another 10 seconds. I looked at the empty space in my office closet where nearly 300 pounds of steel had been anchored that morning. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Rachel Donovan filled the screen. "Call me when you are alone. We have authorization to move forward." I looked through the open doorway at Cynthia directing the contractors like she had just won something. She had no idea the question was no longer whether I possessed her records. The question was why she had become so desperate to take them. My phone was still in my hand when the gray security van pulled away from the curb with my safe inside. Cynthia stood beside her white sport utility vehicle, watching it leave with the satisfied expression of someone who believed the difficult part was over. Gregory closed his leather portfolio and started toward the passenger side. Then 2 dark state vehicles turned on a Hawthorne Court. No sirens. No flashing lights. They simply rolled through the mist and stopped behind Cynthia's vehicle. Doors opened. Rachel Donovan stepped out first wearing a charcoal coat, followed by 3 investigators I knew from the unit and an attorney from the State Inspector General's office. Cynthia looked at them, then back at me. "Did you call the police?" she asked. "No." Rachel walked up the driveway carrying a sealed document folder. Her shoes clicked against the wet concrete. Cynthia immediately stepped forward. "I am Cynthia Harrow, President of Blackridge Estates. This is an authorized association enforcement action." Rachel did not argue. She looked past her toward me. "Director Mercer." Cynthia's face changed. It was subtle at first. Her eyebrows tightened. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Gregory stopped beside the vehicle with one hand still resting on the door handle. Cynthia looked at me. Director of what? I could hear rain tapping against the metal gutters above us. Rachel answered before I did. The State Anti-Corruption Unit. For the first time since I had moved to Blackridge, Cynthia had nothing ready to say. I stepped onto the porch and kept my hands inside my coat pockets. I told you I worked in compliance administration. Gregory stared at me. You deliberately concealed your position. From my neighbors? Yes. Cynthia recovered enough to point toward the street. This has nothing to do with the state. This is a private homeowners association matter. Rachel opened the folder. Not anymore. She handed Gregory one document and Cynthia another. I stayed where I was. That part mattered. Rachel had independent authority over the investigation, and I intended to keep it that way. Director Mercer has been screened from investigative decisions involving Blackridge Estates because he is personally affected, Rachel said. Our office developed the financial evidence independently. Cynthia looked down at the paper. I watched her eyes move faster with every line. Sentinel Civic. Solutions. Procurement records. Association accounts. Vendor payments. Preservation orders. Gregory's face lost color. There must be some misunderstanding, he said. Rachel shook her head. You will have an opportunity to respond through counsel. Cynthia turned toward me. You set us up. No, I said. I asked for vendor bids. She held up the document with a trembling hand. And now state investigators appear the exact night we conduct an inspection? Your inspection was your decision. Rachel's phone rang. She answered, listened for several seconds, then looked at me. The security bin has been located. The safe is being preserved without opening it. Cynthia stared at her. That safe contains association property. Then you can identify the specific property through the appropriate process, Rachel said. You will not access the safe. The sentence landed harder than any raised voice could have. Cynthia looked from Rachel to Gregory, then toward the damaged frame of my front door. I could almost see her replaying the evening in reverse. The cameras, her signed authorization, her statements, the contractors, the safe. Every decision she had made because she thought I was a quiet state employee who would eventually surrender. Rachel stepped closer to me and lowered her voice. We have enough to secure the financial records tonight. I nodded once. Then follow procedure. Cynthia heard me. That was when she finally understood the difference between the authority she had spent years pretending to possess and the authority standing quietly in my driveway. I did not need to threaten her. I did not need to tell anyone what to do. The paperwork was already doing it. Gregory looked at Cynthia and whispered, "We need an attorney." Cynthia said nothing. Across the street, Laura Bennett stood beneath her porch light watching through the rain. I met her eyes for a second. She looked at the papers in Rachel's hand, then at Cynthia, and slowly nodded. The questions Blackridge homeowners had been punished for asking were finally being asked by people Cynthia could not find. The safe came back the next afternoon with the original seal still intact. Rachel had arranged for it to be documented, photographed, and returned without anyone opening it. That detail bothered Cynthia more than she would ever admit, because she had built her entire plan around what she imagined was inside. She thought the steel box contained the one collection of records that could expose her. It did not. By then, the records that mattered were already preserved through proper channels, and Rachel's team had obtained financial documents from sources Cynthia could not control. Bank records, vendor registrations, payment histories, board minutes, contract files. The safe had never been her escape route. Taking it had simply created another trail. My hallway camera showed Cynthia entering my house behind the contractors. The porch camera captured Gregory carrying the signed authorization. The driveway camera recorded the security van arriving empty and leaving with the safe. Cynthia's own phone video documented her calling the removal an official association seizure. Every piece matched the next. No dramatic confession was necessary. The timeline spoke for itself. Over the following weeks, Blackridge Estates became unusually quiet. Cynthia's white sport utility vehicle stopped making its slow morning patrols. Gregory disappeared from board meetings. The association office remained closed for 3 consecutive days while records were preserved and reviewed. Then letters began arriving at homeowners' doors, but these were not violation notices. They informed residents that an independent financial review was underway. Laura brought hers across the street and set it on my kitchen counter. Her hands were steady this time. "I never thought anyone would actually look," she said. "Someone should have looked sooner." Rachel did. The $4,800 security assessment led directly back to Sentinel Civic Solutions. Investigators found that the company had received payments far beyond the equipment and services documented for Blackridge. Older invoices showed similar patterns involving other vendors connected through business registrations and mailing addresses. Gregory's consulting company appeared repeatedly in records that homeowners had never been allowed to examine. Cynthia had signed approvals. Gregory had certified expenses. The exact legal conclusions belonged to investigators and prosecutors, not me. But the financial pattern was no longer hidden behind polished meeting packets and phrases like community standards. Then the residents started talking. One homeowner produced 5 years of assessment letters. Another had emails showing repeated requests for financial statements. A retired accountant 2 streets over had saved copies of budget reports that did not match later versions posted by the association. Every person Cynthia had trained to stay quiet suddenly understood that their old paperwork mattered. The investigation grew without me touching it. That was exactly how it needed to happen. I remained screened from decisions, received updates only when appropriate, and repaired my front door while the process moved forward. The smell of fresh pine returned when the carpenter installed the new frame. This time it smelled different. Clean. Finished. One evening, Rachel stopped by with a property receipt confirming the safe had been released back to me. Cynthia was no longer serving as association president, and Gregory had stepped away from all financial responsibilities pending the outcome of the investigation. A temporary board had opened the association books to an outside audit. I signed the receipt and looked across the street toward the community office. Cynthia's reserved parking space was empty. She thought taking the safe would stop this, Laura said quietly from my porch. I looked at the black steel box through the office doorway. That was her biggest mistake. Cynthia believed evidence was something you could grab with both hands and carry away. She never understood that evidence was also the authorization she signed, the camera she ignored, the invoices she approved, the emails she sent, and the neighbors she punished for asking questions. She had not removed the trail. She had stepped directly into it. By early spring, Blackridge Estates looked almost exactly the way it had when I moved in. The lawns were trimmed. The stone mailboxes matched. Sprinklers clicked across the grass before sunrise. But the silence was different now. People were talking. The independent audit confirmed that homeowners had been charged for projects supported by incomplete bids, questionable vendor relationships, and expenses that could not be properly justified. The temporary board suspended the disputed assessments and began the process of returning money where the records supported reimbursement. Gregory resigned from every association position he held. Sentinel Civic Solutions lost its Blackridge contract. Cynthia was formally removed as president and prohibited from acting on behalf of the association while the remaining legal matters moved through the proper channels. I never celebrated any of it. This was not about watching somebody lose. It was about watching a system finally work after years of being bent around the people controlling it. Laura understood that better than anyone. One Saturday morning, she walked across Hawthorne Court carrying that same faded blue folder. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and coffee from my open kitchen window. "I do not need this anymore," she said. I looked at the folder. "Keep it." She laughed. "After everything that happened, you are telling me to keep paperwork?" "Especially after everything that happened." She held it against her chest and nodded. At the first homeowner meeting under the temporary board, every financial report was projected onto a screen. Vendor names, contract amounts, assessment balances. Questions were taken without anyone receiving a violation notice the following morning. Nobody ruled the room. Nobody needed to. Transparency was surprisingly boring, and that was exactly how it should have been. A few weeks later, I came home from work just after sunset. My repaired front door closed with a solid, clean sound behind me. No cracked frame. No drywall dust. No clipboard waiting on the other side. I walked into my office and switched on the small desk lamp. The safe stood inside the closet exactly where it had before Cynthia decided she had the authority to remove it. The scratches along one corner were still there. I could have replaced it, but I chose not to. Some marks are worth keeping because they remind you what arrogance looks like when it mistakes patience for weakness. I opened the steel door and placed a final personal copy of the property documentation inside. The original HOA notices were there too, including the first citation about 3 square feet of exposed soil, the $4,800 assessment, Cynthia's inspection demands, and the authorization she had personally handed me while standing inside my house. I ran my thumb across her signature for a moment. She had spent months trying to make paper feel like a weapon. In the end, paper became accountability. I closed the door. Beep, beep, click. That sound took me back to my second week in Blackridge, before the fines, before Laura's folder, before Cynthia started watching my office window. Back then, it was only the sound of a lock. Now it meant something else. Outside, a car rolled slowly down Hawthorne Court. I looked through the window and saw Laura waving from her driveway, while 2 neighbors talked beside their mailboxes. Nobody lowered their voices when an HOA board member passed. Nobody looked over a shoulder before asking where their money went. That was the part Cynthia never understood. Real authority was never the clipboard, the title, the threatening letter, or the ability to frighten people into silence. Real authority came with limits, records, oversight, and consequences. Cynthia thought justice was something she could lock inside a steel box and carry away. She was wrong. Justice had already followed the paper trail home. Real authority does not kick down doors. It waits for the people who cross the line, preserves what they leave behind, and makes sure they answer for it.